I think some context really helps us kind of put ourselves into Jesus' shoes a little bit, which is pretty fun. So I want to calm down a little bit. Holy Week takes place with necessary information that biblical writers assume we already know. It'd be a fair assumption to know the political climate and the events that were happening around 20 BC to around 90 AD. It'd be a fair assumption you lived these things, the generation before you have done these things, just like we know and can assume the last 100 years of America. The Gospels are written between 65 and 100 AD, depending on your authorship and which version of a scroll was transliterated. But if you can grab this, Jesus was in Jerusalem around 30 CE or AD, and the Gospels aren't written until 30 years after that. So this is getting written down with hindsight and with knowledge and wisdom that wasn't in live time. The Gospels aren't written down in this time until the end of the lifespan of the eyewitness accounts. So they finally start writing this down, being like, I should write this because I'm about to die, and this is useful information. Helping with that kind of context can give us a better idea of what's going on with Jesus and why he's doing some of these things. Scrolls were the way of writing down miscellaneous information at the time. And they didn't have as much organization as our standard Bible with chapter and verses. They were chunked up by paragraph. So the scroll of Isaiah isn't chapter 22, verse 1. It's just big things of text, just written down and copied. The scrolls are what the Torah and the prophets were written on for the use in the temple and in synagogues. If a scroll had the tetragrammaton, the Yud, He, Vav, He, we call it Yahweh. It's the name of God. It's held with the utmost regard, so you couldn't put anything on top of it. So very reverence for scripture and the name of God itself. So Jews still practice respecting the tetragrammaton, the Yahweh. All right. All right, so this is the timeline that we're looking at. So I wasn't at first service, so I don't know what you guys kind of explained about let my people go. But back 1800 BC, or we call it, historians call it before the Common Era, and then there's Common Era. The Jews went to Egypt because there was famine. That's the whole Joseph story. But then Moses is called out, and that's the whole 10 plagues idea. But that's way back then. And then we fast forward to a bunch of Jewish history here to the Second Temple period, and it's now Roman occupied. So that's 2,000 years. The Jews are in Egypt for 430 years. If you can picture, America is only 250 years old. They're in Egypt under the slave mentality for twice our history as Americans. All right, this is the Roman Empire. I'm sure you've heard of it. Okay, so the region, so Jerusalem, that's like the Greek and the Roman way of saying this. Jews, language changes a lot, so you'll see spelling errors, you'll see region name changes and stuff like that. But the region around Jerusalem was occupied by the Romans at the time of Jesus. This area has been taken over by many empires and people groups over the centuries. And the Jewish people or Israelites have been exiled and moved around due to political occupation and conquest. From this area, a lot. There's the Syrians, the Egyptians, so all in this area, Jews are losing their land year after year, centuries, and all that kind of stuff. So by the time Jesus is in Jerusalem, it was a huge mix of cultures and religions. Since the Roman government was the structure since 60 BC, they've been there for a while by the time Jesus was there in 30. They could charge tax to its occupants, the Roman empires. We hear about tax collectors and tax scenes in the Gospels, and it went towards infrastructure, roads, and aqueducts. Some also went back to actual Rome, way far away. But it was kind of good. You kind of need a tax system to take care of your city, to take care of sanitation and stuff like that. So it wasn't all bad. It just was really bad when they would like price hike or unjustly charge someone or unfairly do it. That's when we're like, oh, that's annoying. Yeah. But taxes are always annoying. As you can see that coming into April. Jerusalem, so Bayuda, is where the temple was, and it's critical in the worship of Yahweh for the Jews. It's a historical city. Jerusalem means city of the king, if that helps you. But we see the Roman Empire. So Caesar is kind of like the king of this whole area. So for him to be a king goes against like the Jewish idea of kingship and lordship of God and Yahweh. Okay. Caesar Augustus, he's like the Caesar you guys kind of all know. He's the one that broke the Roman Empire from the Roman Republic. But this is a couple little stats on it. Jews didn't worship Caesar Augustus because that would not be worshiping God. But they did have to live under the reign of the Roman Empire. So they had to get along with Rome, but they didn't have to serve him as deity. Okay. So we got Caesar. So Caesar appointed Herod the king, or Herod the Great, to be king of Judah. And then Herod's Great. Herod the Great was appointed by Caesar Augustus as the ruler of the Jewish people in this region. And Caesar Augustus calls Herod king of the Jews, which is, I mean, as we know, like that name is pretty significant and holds weight. The Roman Empire was expanding greatly at this time and needed more appointed leaders in all those different areas. And so Augustus appoints Herod, and then Herod, the first Herod, Herod the Great, is the one that we see the Jesus scene where they flee to Egypt because Herod the Great was threatened by the fact that there's going to be a new king of the Jews. And so kills all the babies in Bethlehem, but Jesus escapes to Egypt. So he was the one, Herod the Great was the one at Jesus' birth, and then his sons, more Herods, split up his reign after his death in 4 BC. So Herod the Great dies in 4 BC, so Jesus was born just a little bit before this, but around 4 BC. Herod Antipas had the Galilee region. Cool. Okay, here's a little closer in map. Herod Antipas had the Galilee region in the north. Archelaus had the southern Judea area, and Herod Philip had the region northeast of Galilee. This northeast region is more Gentile focused. Most of the Jews would be in Galilee and Judea at the time. So Bethlehem, Jerusalem, or further north. The mid-Samaria area is not that Jewish, but there's like so much commerce and other religions happening at the same time. So this is just always a hotbed of controversy and chaos. The Herods were more of a political figure. They were Jewish, but more bought by Caesar to like have influence and rule the area of the Jews. So they weren't like the best like preachers and teachers. They just were Jewish by nationality and like ruled the area. Because they didn't have a problem with being called king of the Jews. All right, so if we can see up there, you have Nazareth, so he's up there, Canaan, all these big cities up there in the Galilee region, and then you have Jerusalem down south. So this distance, okay, let's go to this one quick. Okay, so there's multiple ways to get from the north down to the south. These are pretty common pilgrimage paths. So you have the western, central, and eastern. If you like, the Samaria region is kind of like a hotbed for like robberies and stuff. Like it's, and plus like Samaritans didn't get along with Galilean Jews at all. There's like a political and cultural difference. So they kind of just inherently didn't get along. But there'd be 3 festivals that you go back to Jerusalem for. All good Jews would do this in that whole region. So Sukkot is the festival of booths or tents. It's to remember that they were wandering in the desert for 40 years. This is really significant to Jewish practice. It's usually celebrated around harvest time, October-ish. The Jews also have a different calendar, so they don't have the same month structure. They celebrate their holidays on a whole different non-Gregorian calendar. Shavuot is the festival of the weeks. This is when they would celebrate the receiving of the Torah from Moses on Mount Sinai. God renewed his covenant with his people at this festival, so it was very significant. You would go back to the temple to remember that you received the Torah. You would read the Torah. The one Jesus is here for is Pesach, or Festival of the Unleavened Bread, celebrating God's sparing the firstborn in Egypt during the 10 plagues. When Jews were instructed to put the blood of a sacrificed lamb on their doorposts when God passed over, so God would know that they heard him and they followed his instructions. And remembering what happened 1,200 years ago back in Egypt. So this Passover festival is huge, very significant, a lot of sacrifices. You would go to the temple to do these burnt offerings and such. So the Roman Empire knew that these pilgrimages happened all the time, so they would put a bunch of extra Roman guards in to make sure there's not enough chaos. Some people think during these 3 festivals, the influx into Jerusalem was anywhere from 500,000 to 1 million Jews. So like tons of people taking these paths to get there. So depending on which way you see Jesus in his ministries going and bouncing around to some of these city names. And so you would have taken any of these major roads to get there.
And they're still there, those roads.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, these pilgrimage paths still are there. Does anyone have any questions? Like, I'm just rambling and scared, but yeah.
How many miles from one end to the other?
Oh, great question. It's about 60, depending how you go. And it's not like an I-94, like 60 miles. It's like a little more complicated. Any other questions on this? About anything? I just rambled off really fast.
Those festivals, where were each of the festivals held at?
Where were they held at? So you go back to Jerusalem for these pilgrimages. All these Jews, 3 times a year. So, which is kind of funny because Jesus is 30 years old when he did this triumphal entry, but that's his 30th Passover in Jerusalem. And then he would also been there for these other ones too. So he knows what's going on. He's been here before. Any other questions?
Yeah. Nowadays, I know they still do Pesach.
Yeah.
But the top 2, they still celebrate.
Yeah, they're super important. They're no longer pilgrimage festivals because there's no longer a temple. And we'll get more to that significance because the Gospels are written after the fall of the temple. So there's huge implications of that. Jews still practice. So my friend Jay, he was up in the Mequon area. He's the one, I studied under a Gabbai from this guy since I was 14, learning Hebrew and all. I wanted him to teach me the Old Testament. He's like, no, we don't. I'll teach you the Tanakh, I'll teach you the Torah. I was like, oh, thanks, I appreciate that. I was as an ignorant 14-year-old Christian, I was like, can you teach me the Old Testament? As if he believed in a new one and he doesn't. So he's older in life. He has shoulder mobility issues. And so I go help set up his sukkot, his sukkah. It's this, it's supposed to be a temporary dwelling to remember when they were in Egypt, and actually out of Egypt, over in the Sinai region, just wandering in the desert for 40 years. But thankful for provision of food and leaving Egypt, actually. So, yep, still very important. And there's certain how on Easter you have an Easter ham, kind of these traditions. There's a bunch of those kind of same things too. They definitely didn't have ham, but definitely a lot of lamb. So, good question. All right. Okay. So order of operations of these differ in the Gospels because of authorship. The way these suggest, and the fall of the temple is super important because some of these events are switched around to prove Jesus's point a little bit better. I use the timeline in Mark for this. Matthew gives a lot more rich detail. Mark gets to the point really quick. And just like a quick little tidbit, Mark isn't actually an apostle or disciple at the time. John Mark is writing down or scribing Peter's eyewitnesses accounts and Peter's words. So and so with Peter, it just gets to the heart of it quicker. So Sunday, that's today. The triumphal entry. Okay. So you know those paths that we were seeing. So most likely he was on the western path. So last weekend we were talking about Lazarus and how we're like, Jesus, get here, and he's like, no, I'm taking my time. So he would be taking that western route. So when Martha runs to go see him, she knew what road to go. She knew where he was coming from to stop in Bethany. So pit stop in Bethany because it's like the suburbs of Jerusalem, a little more easy to navigate when there's millions of people hustling and bustling. So they're over towards Bethany. And this isn't Jesus' first time doing this at all. So he knew to like go hang out there. He had friends there. He could go have meals with people in Bethany. It wasn't like he just randomly showed up to a town and got a hotel. It's a little more planned out than that. And so I think that's where the retrospective at. Like we can be like, oh, that's why he did that. That's why he's there. Once we put a little more context into it, that's why he's going to these certain places because he had like connections there. And I kind of pulled this out of Matthew over here, just to prove the point that things are written back in. So like it's not being written in live time, and it wouldn't connect all the dots. That this was to fulfill what the prophet said. Like that's why it's written back in after. But something great about the triumphal entry, Jesus didn't come in on like a war horse, like he won a battle. The Roman Empire, the Romans would do this when they conquered more land or had a big entry. They'd come out and look really powerful on like a caravan or chariots and war horses. But Jesus is intentional and comes in on a colt or a donkey, which would be peaceful, more of a servant, humble approach. This would fulfill an Old Testament prophecy, but not all Jews take all of the prophecies and prophets and hold them the same way. But I think it's very clear that he's not coming in to be a political king. Pharisees. Okay, so there's Pharisees and Sadducees. Sadducees they just believe in the first 5 books of the Torah, the books of Moses. Pharisees have more of an oral tradition involved with it too, so they believe in all the prophets, the Psalms, the stories and stuff like that. This oral tradition passed down and practiced because traditions are super important in Judaism. Some good songs about that. So super tradition or super like scholarly are these two camps. The Sadducees just believe in the first 5 books and don't believe in a Messiah. So Messiah comes in with these prophet writings, but if you don't believe in the prophets, you don't really care if there's a Messiah. But you're still Jewish and you still care about tradition. So Sadducees are really protecting this like written, studious kind of style, and Pharisees are more hopeful and want to protect culture and tradition. So, yeah.
What was Nicodemus?
Probably a Pharisee. No, I bet you'd be a Sadducee. I don't know. So you're a Pharisee? Oh, perfect, thank you. So that comes in with context of he would know the prophets. So he would know, but even if you hold all the prophets, there's so many different prophetic writings of what the Messiah was going to be or what you wanted the Messiah to be. Pharisees definitely wanted a political, like an overhaul, and eventually this does happen. But they were always under political oppression. So like even in Egypt, they're like, we just need a new king. We need a king to get us free from here. And so that's what was super cool about Moses doing that. And then now at the time of like 30, they're under this heavy Roman oppression, and they want a new king. They want to be free. They want to be able to practice and not pay taxes to this nut job, so. So like, and he didn't like respect, they were just a political empire. They didn't respect tradition and stuff like that. It wasn't their tradition to respect. It was just definitely a clashing of clans. So another thing, so like when he's here in Bethany, people and scholars think he planned this. He planned the donkey to be set up. He's like, hey, can you go get this ready for me? I'm coming into town. I want to arrive like this. Which I don't think takes away the mystery of it. I think it just doubles down on the point that he's very intentional with what he's doing and where he's going. So when he rides in, people recognize him as a known teacher. He's been to the temple before. He's preached and practiced this for 30 years. Well, 3 really, but he's been there as a kid, so he knows this stuff. Yeah, so when he would be a known teacher in the area, so like they see him, this known teacher riding in on this like humble servant animal, some of them would start clicking it. Be like, this teacher is doing this. He must be Hosanna. Like, this is incredible. Like, he's really, really smart about that. And so they would lay down a cloak like you would for a king, but that'd be more of like the Roman style of doing it. So some Jews were doing it, but some people would just see that this is what we do when this person rolls into town. So they're laying the palms, they're laying cloaks down out of respect. The account of Mark has him returning to Bethany after their triumphal entry, not flipping tables yet. So like just different ways of doing this kind of stuff. And again, I think they're pretty much in Bethany because it's the suburbs of Jerusalem. They knew how to get around. They had connections there. And he probably camped out or hung out where Mary and Martha were. They were friends, they had meals, so this kind of made sense. Okay, Monday. So from Bethany he goes back to Jerusalem and curses the fig tree. This is super significant. The fig tree is supposed to symbolize God's judgment on Israel and how Israel wasn't producing fruit. So you see this imagery come back and then back, it just doubles down throughout the whole Holy Week. And so then Jesus goes into the temple and sees that Jews are price surging and exploiting the traveler. So you would be doing these pilgrim festivals, and if you couldn't bring your doves and your lambs and goats with you, you'd have to buy them there. So during these, there'd just be standard price hikes. You kind of see that in the grocery store now when like certain holidays happen, so full circle. 2 pigeons would be a standard offering for like any kind of ailment or malice or anything like that. There's just like different price structures on offerings like that. A lamb obviously worth a lot more just significantly in price wise, but also necessary for this festival because that lamb is to remember what God did in Egypt and that blood above the door. Spices and other thing are just cheaper, but also necessary in sacrifices and preparation of meals and stuff. But this is the money situation that they're dealing with in the temple. So the temple would be using shekels or silver coins, like pure silver, worth a lot. They didn't have an engraved image, which would be against Jewish practice of like the image of God. Denarius would be the Roman currency, and it had the emperor or the Caesar at the time embossed in the coin. And Jews wouldn't want to do this because they wouldn't want to treat him as king or as God, because Caesar is king and God. But Jews did not believe that. Denarius is 1 day's wage. Shekels are worth 4 denarii, 4 days' wage. This 30 pieces of silver imagery that we hear about Judas later, hopefully can click that it's 4 months' wages, but also the price of a slave. So like the Jews kind of like buy him out. There's like the big significance or depth to that, which is kind of sad. Like now you're a slave to this and you betrayed Jesus, which is a bummer. Okay, Tuesday and Wednesday. Jesus goes back to the temple to teach, which would be common. If you're a very smart teacher, you would go present your thesis or your case in the temple. This is where all the happenings were going on. This is when Jesus is asked by what authority does he preach? Is he a Pharisee or a Sadducee? He's not an Essene. That was a very specific Jewish sect, very known for scribes and writing. That's where you get the Dead Sea Scrolls and Qumran, if you've heard of that kind of thing. They would be writing down all this history as it went, copying scrolls of Isaiah, copying Deuteronomy, all that, because they wanted to remember. But Jesus is asked by what authority. They're asking him, did you study with a different teacher? Like, did you study with Gamaliel, or did you study at a Hillel? Like, how do you know this stuff? You clearly know the content. But they're like, prove it. Like, who are you? Like, what graduate degree do you have? And he's like, I just know it, you know? Because they want to put him in a place. They want to understand this guy. But he's saying, you guys got it all wrong. And it's hard to hear when you're like, but I studied, I know this stuff. And Jesus is like, no, like, you don't. You have it like the exact opposite. So he knows what he's doing. Do you believe? He believes in the oral tradition and the written tradition. But he would ask me, by who did you study? And we have the word rabbi at this time, but it's not held the same as rabbinical Judaism now, because that happens after that fall of the temple. When you can't go to the temple and make your sacrifices, you go to your synagogue and you're with your rabbi and you study rabbinical Judaism. So that's a split after the fall. So rabbi doesn't mean like the rabbinical Judaism. It strictly means teacher. It's teacher in Hebrew. All right, the big deal. Thursday. I think this is super interesting and probably one of my favorite things ever. The Seder. Does anyone have any Jewish friends or been to a Seder? Sweet. Okay. You know it takes forever. It's insane. So what Jesus is doing at the Seder isn't new. He's taking a cup that was already established and bread that was already established. And he would go through the Tanakh, or this is a Haggadah. So you go through this whole book of remembering that last day and all the plagues, all the slavery, the tears in Egypt, the mortar of the pyramids, just to really land it. And you would ask questions at this time, because asking questions really helps you think and land information. It's a really great teaching style, but it's also fun just to, debate things and question things and think about it more deeply. So when Jesus takes this cup and do this in remembrance of me, something I don't think we land as Christians, during the Seder, there's 4 cups actually that are significant. There's the cup of sanctification, meaning I will bring you out. The cup of deliverance, I will deliver you. The cup of redemption, I will redeem you. And the cup of praise, I will take you as my people. So when Jesus takes the cup, I think he's taken this whole idea and saying, do this, free from slavery, free from that in my name. Like, I am taking you out of slavery and put you into a land of freedom. And then take the bread. This is my body. The bread was always passed around. It's the feast of the unleavened bread, so they got out of Egypt fast. They didn't even let their bread raise. So it's like a really bad saltine. And so then you're breaking this bread, but you're doing this thing that to remember, like, I will provide for you. And he's taking these really basic things of this very significant meal and saying, hey, remember me. And then all this stuff clicks after he dies, but you have to go back and go, oh yeah, he did say that, do this. So the next Seder, they would remember him when they take the cups. So it's pretty rich, deep content. If you've been to a Seder, he's like, wow, that's really significant to say, do this in remembrance of me. But I think that's what Jesus does a lot in these. He flips the script on it. He's taking the Seder and flipping it. Pilgrimages were meant to be good. Rules were meant to be good. But Jesus is bringing in this new life and new covenant, and that's what's so different, and people don't see that until after he dies. After he dies, the temple falls, and he's like, oh yeah, Jesus said it was going to fall. So you look back on these things, being like, oh yeah, Jesus was right all along. We just didn't really see it. And so I think that's what's really significant on this. Does anyone have any questions about the Seder or Jewish tradition or practice? Okay.
Is there a role of the lamb in the Seder?
Absolutely. So you would have a Seder plate, so the lamb shank. So not only did you make your sacrifices, you would actually eat the lamb shank, like this meal. And that's one way they also categorize like how many people were in Jerusalem at the time. They count how many lambs that they had. And or like basically the grocery store, it's like, well, there's 700 lambs and you could only get a lamb if you had more than 10 people in your party. So like certain things like that, that's kind of how historians calculate numbers of this too. But yeah, the lamb is significant. And then we see Jesus becoming the lamb. So it's just this huge big picture on that.
How are the matzah balls significant with Jewish history?
Just practice, I don't know. They're just always there. It's, yeah, matzo ball soup. It's unleavened. You would do it and you just boil them. It's just probably just a different way of matzah preparation.
Like a matzah
Yeah.
is just this flat cracker that's like the unleavened bread. And then you crunch it up and you put it together with other stuff and you make a matzah ball out of it. But the matzah itself is like a not great saltine, a not salty saltine.
Exactly. But then you would dip it in this like with bitter herbs and little salt water to remember the tears. So pretty, and like you'd also have haroset, which is supposed to be the brick and mortar of the pyramids to remember the slavery. And it's usually made of like apples and cinnamon, this like grout looking stuff. So they had all this like tactile significance to remember. And during this meal, you would ask all these questions like, why is this night different than all the other nights? Tonight we get to recline. It's just like realizing the significance of being freed from Pharaoh. Like being suppressed for 430 years and then being freed. Like that's huge. I have no equivalent to that.
I know there are subtleties and different traditions of Seder, but is there an empty chair at the table?
Yeah. Do you know why there's an empty chair?
Yeah, that there's a hope that someone's gonna come
Yeah.
and set them free.
Yeah.
And so you get that whole notion what begins Elijah, but it's Jesus.
Yeah. So if you're at this huge table, there's so much there's so much depth about this actual meal. So depending where you sat had significance. So the host would have you go through it. There would be the youngest person in the room would have to read some questions because that youngest person is supposed to drive the conversation and is like an eager learner because the people who have done it many times before, at one point, they were the youngest in the room. So it's a really good way to teach the next generation what to do by asking questions. And we see Jesus awesome at this. When he was asked a question, he'd rebuttal with a question to get the people to think. It's a really good way of engaging people. Alice?
So, in the Jewish tradition, this Passover Seder is the end of this festival they've all made a pilgrimage for?
Yep.
Okay, so this is the grand finale.
Well, sorry, no.
Okay.
There's like 2 nights of the Seder, and then you'd hang out for a week. So there's this could have been the first or second night of the start of the festival. That would be so. There's the 2 first nights, and then sometimes it ends with not a Seder, but like a different celebration. And you're always at the temple learning and remembering and discussing the text. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, here.
Yeah, I think being incredibly practical, but all these people with these sacrifices, you know, hundreds of lambs, etc. What became of them? The pit, the birds, all the
Sure.
different things.
Some would like just literally, some were repurposed. Things couldn't go bad the next day, so you'd make the sacrifice at the temple. Some would go to feed the Sanhedrin, the people, the staff of the temple. The temple is a massive structure, and it did take a lot of people to maintain it. So then you also see the temple tax, kind of to the equivalent of a tithing idea here, but you would go and give money so that you could go and worship. And stuff just needed to be maintained. These are huge structures in Jerusalem. Any other questions? I don't know really where I'm going with this anymore, so help me out here. So yeah, if you have any questions about like the depth of it or like locations or any of this stuff. Something kind of fun to point out. So eventually we hear Jesus is on trial and people are hanging out and they're like, oh, you must be one of his disciples, and they deny him. One way that the one way I really picture this, like how could you tell a Galilean Jew from a Jerusalem Jew? To me, I put it the difference of like, you have a Texan accent and you're like, oh, that sounds so much different to me than my Wisconsin accent. Like I sound super north. You say boat and stuff like that. Like you would just hear it and they address just a little bit differently by climate or whatever. So if you're like, hey, you have a Texan accent, you must know this guy. And to deny that would be really absurd because the Galilean region is smaller. And if you didn't know Jesus when he was doing all of his ministry, feeding 500 people, feeding 400 people, you would know this guy's name by now. And so to then deny him in a different city with your Texan accent would be kind of weird. You probably would have known this guy, and you're not really trustworthy.
One thing that struck me is that Jesus had been going to the temple in Jerusalem for the 30 years of his life.
Mm-hmm.
And is there any information or trace that at the time of that he's on trial, that any of the leaders said, hey, remember this is the boy that was here 30 years ago?
Well, depending if you're talking about the Roman trial or the Jewish trial. The people in the temple would know of him by now, but that would be like before the Sanhedrin, and then you have Caiaphas, the high priest, that also like goes, and then the Roman trial is between Herod and Pontius Pilate, and so you have these two camps debating on like who this person is. The Roman trial, they don't really care that he's Jewish or doing anything. They just don't want anyone overtaking the government. Mm-hmm. And then, so they don't really need to know about him, but Caiaphas and the high priest and the Sanhedrin probably knew someone that knew him. Yeah.
So going off of that, didn't anybody remember his birth and all the, when Herod went to kill all the babies and everything? Nobody made this connection with that was when that happened?
No, maybe they did. I don't exactly know, but that's a really good like aha moment. Like if you see people leaving Bethlehem, like down here by Jerusalem, to flee to Egypt, you would know Herod's like kind of worried about someone, but that's more also the political upheaval versus the religious upheaval. Does that kind of make sense? It's a good question. I don't know.
I mean, like all the shepherds knew that this was Christ, and then they all forgot about him because he was just that kid down the road.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And well, it's like, isn't this the guy from Nazareth? Like, what does he know?
Star.
Yeah. Well, and some people are like, isn't this the carpenter's son?
Yeah.
And so there's a good bet that Jesus also was a really good carpenter, but also a really good son of God.
Well, and would anybody listen to shepherds?
Yeah, not as a high regard. So you would listen to someone that went to school. It cost you a ton of money to go to school. That means you weren't doing a family trade. You weren't making money for your family. You were wasting your money by studying. So it would be, you'd listen to a scholar more than you'd listen to someone who makes shoes. Yeah?
I think there was a lot of fear too around Jesus and what he was claiming, and the Romans could put anybody they wanted to death in like a horrible way, and so you wouldn't want to be aligned with Jesus or speak up for him or defend him because it was just so high stakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And because that's like the oppression of the Roman government. Just like you saw the oppression of the Pharaoh, like to be a slave, to not have your own advocacy, like you're put in a lower place, and so it would be a really tricky time, especially if Jesus is like, I don't want you to be in slavery anymore. That would be a direct threat to the Roman Empire.
I mean, he didn't really fit the narrative, right? Like they were expecting like this line to come in, so I think they were like, nah.
Yeah.
Like, that
You're
cannot
not
be.
on the workhorse, you're not.
Right,
Yeah.
right, so I think that also just not fitting
Yeah.
the expectation, that's just.
That's what's so cool. They're like, you think it's gonna be this, but I'm doing this whole other thing, and this is really what you need to be focusing on.
Right.
Which is hard to hear. You're like, but this is what we thought we were supposed to do. And Jesus is like, you're doing it so wrong. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, we think of like the shepherds and the star, but that isn't God's plan. And I think the focus should be on what God's plan is, and not what a human aspect of it would be.
Sure, yeah. But I think those can go together too, because Jesus is also fully human. So he is operating with the same rules, but much smarter.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I understand in the Seder, it ends with next year in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And with the interpretation of fundamentalism and with Christians,
Mhm.
it's the rebuilding of the temple.
Yep.
Historically.
Yeah, and still.
And Christians identify that as the return of Christ. When Messiah comes back and
Sure.
the temple will be reestablished.
Yeah.
And that is fed with many, many people in our country, and see that going on right now with the war, to
Okay.
reclaim and build the temple. Hear what I'm saying?
Yeah, I don't know how to speak into
Zionism.
it. Yeah.
From a Christian perspective.
Yeah, I don't know enough about that.
Yeah, but it's going on.
Yeah, I just honestly don't know enough.
How did the temple fall in the
Oh,
first place?
sweet, thanks. There's a first temple and then a second temple. It's always by political occupation. So in 70, when the temple, well, it starts in like 67, the Roman, it's the Jewish revolt. So 30 years after Jesus died, the Jews are like really sick of the Roman Empire. And so they start like stirring up stuff. And Rome's like, well, we're just gonna rip apart Jerusalem. So the Roman Empire destroys the second temple and degrade it massively. Like the stones are overthrown. They start making sacrifices of pigs on it. Like just really, Rome's just like, you guys, you had a chance and you screwed it up and we're taking away your temple. And
But
then
the hope is to restore it.
it's always to restore it. So even my Jewish friends now are like, next year in Jerusalem. And we're like, that's really complicated. Like, good luck with that. And as Christians, we don't need a temple anymore. We got Jesus. Like, that whole system is destroyed. And like, there's such freedom in that.
Is the Sadducee belief system kind of what carries after the fall of the temple? Like,
So Sadducees dismantle after the fall of the temple.
oh,
Okay, so Sadducees and Pharisees are in for this pilgrimage festivals because it happens in the first 5 books. It happens in Exodus. So the scribes and Sadducees are okay with that because it's in the first 5, and it's not prophetic writing. But once the temple is destroyed, like all of the Jewish structure gets screwed up because they don't have this temple. So everything kind of merges into this Pharisee tradition, but even by then, it's different. It turns into rabbinical Judaism because of the temple is gone.
So, maybe this is naive or something. So the Last Supper was really sort of a Seder?
Yeah.
I mean, okay, because all we hear about is the
Yeah.
blood and the wine and
Yeah.
and being betrayed and everything, but that was actually a much bigger
Huge deal.
meal. Okay.
Yeah, so he's there to do this meal, and then he's saying it just ends up being his last one, and so that's why it even has like even more significance. Because he could have been the host for the one 2 years before, and he didn't say do this in remembrance of me then.
after they have the Seder meal, then he washes the feet.
So that's order of operations. Some people think he was anointed before that, like with the hair and the oil and all that. Some people think that happened on the Sunday before he even went into the temple the first time. There's huge significance of anointing and oil the oil at this time is like, it's literally the amount of olives, like olive oil. And so even when he goes to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane, that's actually an oil press. So like they're constantly making oil and anointing oil and lamps and oil, all that stuff really does. But yeah, the Seder meal is significant. Okay.
I think what's interesting is that when you count or read the four Gospels, half of it is 1 week in Jesus' life.
And that's how I think the authorship writes back into that. It's like we need to focus on this chunk. We don't really talk about what he was doing when he was 22 years old. Like, no one cares. You're making boats or something. Because you're up there. But then we're going to hyper focus on like all this stuff right at the end. Because it has a lot to do with him actually being the Messiah, him actually sacrificing like a lamb. Like this whole imagery really blows up the last week.
With the good news, yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah,
Yes.
kind of off the subject, but
Great.
I think there's the Pharisees, there's the Sadducees, and I think you named another.
The Essenes is another group. They were really the radicals.
Okay,
Mhm.
what group, or did they get all together and put the Talmud together?
Sure.
Because you think they'd have a lot of friction.
Yeah, so eventually the Sadducee practice crumbled. The Talmud comes later. And you also have like other writings of Jews. So a lot of historians don't use the Bible to like prove itself. We're using like other historian context, like Josephus or Pliny the Elder. So Talmud and tradition and Pirkei Avot, like different writings come later. And it depends what you agree with or don't agree with. Like the Essenes double down on different gospel. Like there's different writings and scrolls at the time. They just get assembled into that kind of Bible style later, after different authorship, and if you're doing a Septuagint or what you kind of, if you're following the Greek or if you're following the Hebrew, it's how you assemble it. And there's other gospels written about Jesus, there's other letters to things, and so it's like who assembles it, the canonization of the Bible. But yeah, good question.
So how did this all come together? Because Jesus goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, and there he's arrested.
Mm-hmm.
But then we're all of a sudden talking, it's the next day. I mean, did they all take a break and go to bed? Or,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Some think that he's like, so after he like just ate this huge meal, took forever, he's like, I need a little alone time. Goes to Gethsemane and is praying, and they think like somewhere around midnight he was arrested, chucked in jail until like about sunrise when they figured out what to do. But that would have been Friday morning. Then the Roman trial happens, the Jewish trial, and they bounce back and forth, not really wanting anything to do with it, but then really not wanting to live anymore. So
You could take a little nap while you
like curl up on a rock or something. Any other questions?
Can you go back to going through all the days of Holy Week? Because I have to preach on Good Friday.
So yeah, good question. Okay, yeah, and we have the Sanhedrin. That they would be in the temple. It's just like an elite group of Jews that really knew this stuff. Usually, I'm pretty sure there are a lot more Sadducees in the Sanhedrin than Pharisees. You're preaching on Good Friday?
Yeah.
Good luck.
Oh.
Any questions on this? Or like, again, the anointing? Some is up. Yeah, some go around. Some think the anointing happened Monday. Some think he got into town on Friday and then had like Sabbath. So you'd like kind of just chill out and do nothing Friday night. So that's why he would be traveling on a Sunday into the temple. Whereas like if you were practicing the Sabbath, you wouldn't be doing any kind of work or get prepping for a Seder.
Is there we talked that Lazarus was dead 4 days.
Yep.
He was raised back to earthly life, not resurrected by Jesus. And Jesus was, in the tomb for 3 days. What's the significance of 3?
3 is like really dead. So like, well, 4 is really, really dead. How do you one up that? There's just a numerical symbolism in scripture. You see this a lot in the Old Testament. Some of these numbers aren't actually representative of the thing. It's just significance. So like the 12, 7, 40, all these like huge numbers, just have added value to them. So whether they were accurate or not, it's there to carry weight.
But 3 was,
Huge.
this person is actually dead, because people would go into like a coma or whatever and maybe come out of it. So 3 days was like, okay, this person is actually dead.
Yeah.
If you read the gospel, it says 4 days for Lazarus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super dead. And smelly. So